have got to know whether or not their president is trust.
Read my lips.
American people have voted to make a new beginning.
There is no limit to the greatness of America.
Yes, we can.
Hi there, welcome to Planet America. I'm John Barron.
And I'm Chaz Licciardello.
Coming up, a wrap of the second presidential debate with a former debate moderator, John Harwood of CNBC.
And we're going to be looking at the pros and cons of negative campaign advertising with the man who wrote the book. Literally, Daryl West, author of Air Wars. But first, it's news time.
Heading the news from Planet America this week, Barack Obama and Mitt Romney faced off in the second presidential debate at Hofstra University in New York. The president was under pressure to make amends for his rather lacklustre appearance in the first debate a fortnight earlier. It was a free-flowing town hall-style event with questions from a group of undecided voters.
The president's policies have been exercised over the last 4 years, and they haven't put Americans back to work. We have fewer people working today that we had when the president took office.
And Governor Romney says he's got a 5-point plan. Governor Romney doesn't have a 5-point plan. He has a 1-point plan. And that plan is to make sure that folks at the top play by a different set of rules. That's been his philosophy in the private sector. That's been his philosophy as governor. That's been his philosophy as a presidential candidate.
We took a concerted effort to go out and find women who had backgrounds that could be qualified to become members of our cabinet. I went to a number of women's groups and said, can you help us find folks? And they brought us whole binders full of women. It's a level job. That's not
a major difference in this campaign is that Governor Romney feels comfortable having politicians in Washington decide the health care choices that women are making. I think that's a mistake. Sure.
In the last 4 years, you cut permits and licenses on federal land and federal waters in half.
Not true, Governor Romney.
So how much did you cut them by?
Not true.
By how much did you cut them by then?
Governor, we have actually produced more oil.
No. How much did you cut licenses and permits on federal land and federal waters?
Governor Romney, here's what we did. There were a whole bunch of oil companies.
No, I had a question, and the question was, how much did you cut them by?
You want me to answer
How much did you cut them by?
It got a little bit tense at times, but perhaps the most memorable moment was this exchange over last month's attack on the US consulate in Benghazi, Libya.
The suggestion that anybody in my team, whether the Secretary of State, our UN ambassador, anybody on my team would play politics or mislead when we've lost 4 of our own, Governor, is offensive.
You said in the Rose Garden, the day after the attack, it was an act of terror. I want to make sure we get that for the record, because it took the president 14 days before he called the attack in Benghazi an act of terror.
Get the transcript.
He did, in fact, sir. So let me call it an act of terror.
Can you say that a little louder, Candy?
He did call it an act of terror.
Okay, so after all that, who was right? Well, the moderator there, Candy Crowley, she was right. That Obama did refer to acts of terror in his speech the day after the attack. But he did so in an incredibly ambiguous way. Just after talking about the anniversary of 9/11, he said, no acts of terror will ever shake the resolve of this great nation. That was the whole use of acts of terror. So was he talking about the Libya attacks, 9/11, both? Who knows? He was probably being deliberately ambiguous while the facts were still unverified.
Of course.
Which is a sensible thing to do. Either way, it was far too ambiguous for Romney to be so definitive as he was in that clip. And I think Romney might be a victim of the Fox News bubble there. He should watch Planet America for his info, I think.
Excellent advice. Excellent advice. Also making news this week, the FBI foiled an alleged plot to blow up the Federal Reserve building in New York City. The alleged bomber, 21-year-old Bangladeshi student Qazi Nafis, reportedly told investigators that he wanted to disrupt the presidential election and also considered targeting Barack Obama for a bombing himself. An FBI sting operation saw Nasi set what he thought was half a ton of explosives in a vehicle outside the Fed and tried to detonate it with a mobile phone. The explosives were a harmless material provided by those FBI agents. Police have in the last few hours confirmed a second arrest related to this alleged plot, a man facing child pornography charges in California. Now to this week's polls, and the national and state polls are painting quite a different picture again this week. Have a look. According to today's Gallup tracking poll, which spans surveys from before and after that second presidential debate, Mitt Romney has established a quite remarkable 7 percentage point lead. But in the average of national polls compiled by Real Clear Politics, Governor Romney is ahead by just 1 percentage point. And importantly, perhaps, for Mr Romney, his net favourability rating is up dramatically. He now leads Barack Obama after trailing him by around 10% just a month ago. But it was, as we know, the dozens of battleground states that decided the last election and will decide this one. They'll tell the story, and there Barack Obama still has a slight edge, it seems. Let's look at how the Electoral College stands this week. Overall, it's unchanged from last week, although a little bit more competitive. Barack Obama leads in the states of Virginia, Ohio, Wisconsin, Iowa, New Hampshire, Nevada, Michigan and Pennsylvania. Romney in front in North Carolina, Missouri, Florida and Colorado as well. And we'll have some more potentially crucial state polls which show early voting trends, with CNBC's John Harwood joining us shortly.
A few polls caught my eye, John, as always. First of all, the debate. Now, it's a real cliche that the debates are often about expectation management, but it's a cliche because it's true.
Right.
And if we go to the Pew poll on the laptop, we can see that 51% of people expected Obama to win the first debate compared to 29% who expected Romney to win. So Obama didn't meet those expectations. But look at the second debate. Only 41% of people expected Obama to win, compared to 37% who expected Romney to win. And surprise, surprise, people thought Obama did a lot better this time. It's always about expectation management. Now, admittedly, he did do better as well. That's probably part of it as well. Yeah. But still, interesting stat. The next poll is from Gallup, and it sheds light on why Romney's doing just so well at the moment. It basically comes down to women. Now, you might recall Obama was ahead by about 20 points amongst women a month ago. Yeah. Well, now, go to the laptop. Obama, in swing states, is only ahead 49 to 48 amongst likely female voters. And that's a huge problem because he's consistently had a 7 to 10% deficit amongst men. And now he's still got an 8% deficit amongst men. This whole campaign, he's had that 10% deficit. There is nothing that helped Romney more in that first debate than his attempts to appeal to women, because they've stuck. And finally, for the stupidest poll of the week, which seems to always come from the Washington Post, by the way, we have the question: who do you think is more likely to go bungee jumping, Obama or Romney? And the answer, 60% of people say that Obama would be more likely to go bungee jumping than a senior citizen. What a massive surprise. Great get, Washington Post.
Finally, to the news this week of the death of veteran US Senator Arlen Specter at the age of 81. The Pennsylvania moderate served as a Republican Party senator for 28 years until he quit the party to vote as a Democrat for the stimulus bill in early 2009 and again the following year for President Obama's healthcare reforms. Specter was one of the last old-style moderate Republicans, and he told me in an interview a few months back now that the decision to leave the party was harder than going through a divorce.
When I cast the vote in the stimulus package, there was no doubt that I could not win a Republican primary. You could politely characterize it as irreconcilable differences, but there was no longer any room for me in the party.
He's a very interesting man, and more of that interview with Arlen Specter coming up in a new documentary called The Party of Reagan, which is going to air on ABC News 24 just before the election in a couple of weeks.
You know, unlike many politicians, Arlen Specter has left a genuine legacy. As you say, Obamacare, he was not just a vote, he was the 60th vote that got past the filibuster and over the line in the Senate. As a Republican, of course, he was under massive pressure already in his upcoming primary because, as you said, not just did he vote for Obamacare, he actually voted for the stimulus as well. And now when we're talking about the stimulus, we're talking about something which was a result of, which not only helped the economy, but also increased cancer funding by 34%. And that's the reason he did it.
Because he had cancer 4 or 5 times before the one that killed him.
Absolutely. And he basically got bought off with this 34% increase in funding for the National Institute of Health. So good on him. There's a lot of worse things you can do. You can sell your party out for than saving lives, I reckon.
Yeah, quite a legacy.
But you don't see politicians from either side crossing the aisle and getting along too often these days, except for one occasion, and that is the Al Smith dinner. It's one of the few times when politicians are intentionally funny. And the candidates were in fine form today before going back to hating each other tomorrow.
Of course, I'm pleased that the President's here. We were chatting pleasantly this evening as if Tuesday night never happened.
This is the third time that Governor Romney and I have met recently. As some of you may have noticed, I have a lot more energy in our second debate. I felt really well rested after the nice long nap I had in the first debate.
People seem to be very curious as to how we prepare for the debates. Let me tell you what I do. First, refrain from alcohol for 65 years before the debate. Second, find the biggest available straw man and then just mercilessly attack him. Big Bird didn't even see it coming.
Some people say, Barack, you're not as young as you used to be. Where's that golden smile? Where's that pep in your step? And I say, settle down, Joe. I'm trying to run a cabinet meeting here.
For the best part of the last year, Barack Obama has enjoyed a small but seemingly solid opinion poll lead over Mitt Romney. But in the last couple of weeks, that all changed, and a Romney victory, or even an electoral college tie, is looking quite possible now. A new batch of polls are coming out in the US right now, which shed some more light on the real state of this race. John Harwood is the senior Washington correspondent with CNBC America. Let's have a look at some of the polls that are coming out. You've got to explain what's going on. A month ago, Barack Obama more than 4% in front. This week, Mitt Romney in the average of polls, he's in front. In a Gallup poll today, he's 7% in front. It can't all be about that first debate, can it?
No, it's not all about the first debate, although I've got to tell you that most pollsters that I've talked to in both parties don't believe that Mitt Romney's 7 points ahead. They think there's some problems with that Gallup sample. Undoubtedly, though, it's a closer race than it was before the first debate on a national basis. Mitt Romney improved the way people looked at him across the country. He presented a much more favorable impression than he had previously in the race. Obama still, however, has a lead in the battleground states that you need to put together to get the electoral votes. Under the American system, it's not just the total votes you win, but the electoral votes in the individual states. Obama has an edge there, and he still does from after the two debates that have happened so far.
So instead of looking at these national numbers, we should be looking at Obama leading by 2 or 3% in Ohio and say maybe that's where the election really is. Is that what you're suggesting?
Exactly. And, you know, there's 8 or 9 or 10 battleground states that Obama won in 2008 where the two sides have been fighting it out. Mitt Romney has to win most of those states to get to 270 electoral votes. And we've got new polls from NBC out tonight in 2 of those battlegrounds, Iowa and Wisconsin, that show the challenge still ahead of Mitt Romney, even with better national polls. In Iowa, he trails by 8 percentage points. In Wisconsin, he trails by 6 percentage points. And one of the reasons for that disparity is that in the battlegrounds, that's where voters have been pounded with all of the negative advertising, all the election efforts that the campaigns have been putting out, more so than on a national basis. So it's really the states like Florida, Ohio, Virginia, Iowa, Wisconsin, Colorado that you really need to look at to see where this race is going.
And can you explain to us, John, the way in which the early voting that happens in some states, but not all states, but certainly in states like Ohio and Iowa, how is that potentially locking in a significant advantage for Obama now?
This is a fascinating, quiet revolution in the American electoral process. More and more states are going to early voting to make it more convenient for people to cast ballots on days other than Election Day. So, for example, in the state of Iowa, which I just talked about, where Obama has an 8 percentage point lead, if you look at the people in the state of Iowa who say they plan to vote on Election Day, it's about 55% of the electorate. Mitt Romney leads by 15 percentage points among those people. But among all of the others who say that they either already have voted or plan to vote before Election Day, Obama's getting 2/3 of the vote. That reflects the organizational advantage. While Mitt Romney was still fighting it out in the primaries and caucuses in Iowa and other states along the way toward the nomination, Barack Obama was organizing, and now he's harvesting those votes. It's a big edge for Obama. Similarly, in the state of Wisconsin, where we've got new numbers out tonight, Obama gets more than 60% of the vote among the 15% of the people who say that they're going to vote early, much closer in the Election Day balloting. So to some degree, when we get to Election Day, a lot of the election will already have happened.
So this is an important area, John, because in 2008, of course, the Obama organising machine, the get out the vote machine, the ability to get people to vote in the Iowa caucuses, all through the primaries and on Election Day, first-time voters made Barack Obama President of the United States. But then in the midterms, that infrastructure and those first or even second-time voters disappeared in 2010. The big question has been, is he going to get those people out to vote? And you're seeming to suggest, and your polls seem to suggest, that yes, they are.
Well, he's not going to get as many of them as he had before. In those new Iowa and Wisconsin polls that I mentioned, the share of the vote cast by voters under 30 years old is significantly smaller than it was in 2008. Obama still has a big edge among those young voters, but it's a smaller share of the electorate. But remember, because he won the election with 53% of the vote last time, he can have a smaller margin and still win the election. The challenge for Democrats is to prevent that drop-off from being too great, not only with younger voters, but also with Hispanics, where Obama holds a big edge, and with African Americans where he has a huge, overwhelming edge. To give you one more example of how they're trying to make that happen, just today, Bruce Springsteen, the rock star, is having a concert in the state of Ohio, appearing with Bill Clinton. And at that rock concert, which is designed, of course, to pull out young voters, there are stations set up where people can vote early. So that is another reflection of how Democrats are trying to harvest votes now so that they can then focus on the remaining people who haven't voted on Election Day.
John Harwood, let's get your insights into this week's Tuesday night second presidential debate. The polls of voters and most pundits called it a win for Barack Obama, but not as great a win as Mitt Romney had 2 weeks earlier in the first encounter. Is that how you called it as well?
Yes. Mitt Romney, as the challenger, has more of an upside from the debating period because he's not as well known to Americans. So the fact that he was able to come out strong in that first debate, make a good impression on many voters who hadn't seen him at that level of exposure before, helped him more than President Obama helped himself with the second debate. The reason Obama won the second debate was he came out so much more aggressive and sharp. That's what was different from the second debate to the first. But since Obama's so familiar to Americans, they already like him reasonably well, he doesn't have quite as much upside. But I have to tell you that when we look at the Iowa and Wisconsin polls that I mentioned that came out tonight, the numbers are not much different than they were before both debates, and that's because the overwhelming majority of American voters, more than 90%, say they made up their mind long before either debate took place.
There was that, if not exactly a Perry-esque oops moment, there was certainly an awkward moment for Governor Romney over the question of Libya, and at what point President Obama used the word terrorism to describe the Benghazi US consulate attack. Candy Crowley, the moderator, sort of intervened at that point and effectively fact-checked and sided with the president. That's caused some criticism of her from some conservatives. What did you think of that exchange in terms of what it says about the candidates, but also the format and the moderator?
Well, I thought Candy Crowley as a whole did a very, very good job under trying circumstances in that debate. Both candidates saw the stakes as so high for their performance that they were trying to blow through all the time cues, trying to ignore Candy when she was trying to move on to a different question, and she did very well. On the case of calling Mitt Romney on acts of terror, I think that was a difficult thing for her to do, but one that was justified because Mitt Romney had just said that President Obama had taken 2 weeks to say the words act of terror about the Benghazi attack, and in fact, as she correctly pointed out, he said those words in the White House Rose Garden the day after the event. Conservatives didn't like it, but that was unfortunate, and Mitt Romney essentially set up that moment by making that claim.
John, the third and final debate's coming up in the week ahead. This is meant to be foreign policy only. First one was domestic, second one domestic and foreign. This is meant to be foreign policy only. Do you think we're going to hear a lot about Libya, or is it going to be foreign policy in the form of outsourcing of jobs and Swiss bank accounts, that kind of foreign policy?
Well, I think it'll be both, and I think you're exactly right. Even though the subject is foreign policy, that is clearly not what's on the minds of the American people. So you can expect the candidates to pivot from foreign policy and try to use the fact that we live in a global economy and trade and international relations are a big part of economic growth to make economic arguments through the foreign policy prism.
It's going to be an interesting couple of weeks. Thank you very much for joining us this week.
You bet.
You do bet. This week, States of the Union takes us to Iowa, host of the first in the nation caucuses, and the state Obama credits with making him president. Could be decisive again this year.
Iowa is right in the Midwestern heartland of the United States. They call it the Hawkeye State, after the Indian, not the guy from MASH, although Radar from MASH was born in Ottumwa, Iowa, but Radar wasn't real. Tough guy actor John Wayne was real, and he really was born in Iowa, although when he lived in Winterset, Iowa, his first name was Marion. Buddy Holly, Richie Valens, and the Big Bopper all died near Clear Lake in Iowa in 1959, the day the music died, and Don McLean just keeps on singing about it. Iowa was the 29th state of the Union and is the 26th biggest in size. About as big as Nepal, give or take, but without the mountains. Iowa is the only state name to start with two vowels. Iowa is also the first state to vote for the American presidential nominees. Sometimes Iowans pick the winner, like Democrat Barack Obama in 2008. Sometimes they don't, like Republican Mike Huckabee, also in 2008. Iowa was home to America's 31st president, Herbert Hoover, and it's still home to the covered bridges of Madison County. The world's crookedest street is in Burlington, Iowa, and the shortest railway in the world is in Fenton Place in Dubuque. But for a middle-sized state with just 3 million people, 94% of them white, Iowa still has a really big political influence. In fact, Iowans are pretty big all round. 28% of them are now technically obese, partly because of all the corn they grow in Iowa that keeps getting turned into high fructose corn syrup. As well as the famous Iowa caucuses, Iowa is a swing state, and its 6 electoral college votes could prove crucial this November in the presidential election.
Okay, we've now seen 2 presidential debates with a lot of claims made and a lot of people saying those claims are untrue. So I thought I'd take a moment to examine a couple of them. Firstly, Obama's been hitting what he calls Romney's fuzzy math pretty hard. Romney says he's going to substantially cut tax rates and he'll pay for that by capping tax deductions at a number like $17,000 or $25,000. Obama says it's impossible. So who's right? Well, in this case, Obama. Every respected model out there says it will cost about $4.5 trillion to deliver Romney's proposed tax cuts. And this, if we go to the laptop, is how much Romney's going to claw back by reducing tax deductions. Here are 3 different tax deduction caps that Romney has mentioned at some point in time. None of them get even close to paying for Romney's promises. Now, there are other estimates out there, but none of them push the money raised by closing tax deductions past this line here. So there's quite a deficit there. Now, Romney says 6 studies support his maths. Well, what he means by 6 studies is 4 blog posts plus 2 studies that say something different to what he's implying they do. And on Romney's side, he hits Obama for not creating enough jobs over the last 4 years. Obama says, hey, we created 5 million jobs. Who's right? Well, in this case, Romney. Obama is correct that he created 5 million jobs, but it just isn't much. That only just matches population growth. If you look at the employment numbers compared to the long-term trend line, you can see here that the jobs gap hasn't closed a jot since the recession. They're around 12 million jobs short of where they need to be, and they've consistently been that far for the last 3 years. Now, Obama blames Congress for that. And he's right, they haven't been terribly helpful. But at the moment, we're still mostly enjoying the fruits of the laws that Congress passed before 2011. The laws after 2011 haven't even kicked in yet. When the Democrats, they were much more helpful before 2011. So Obama got a lot of the things he wanted. And Obama could have done more. So he can't complain. Finally, we've got Romney's claim that he's going to create 12 million jobs over the next 4 years. He's just saying it over and over and over again. Is it true? Well, probably yes. But to be honest, so what? Because, according to Moody's, anyone would create 12 million jobs over the next 4 years. That's their prediction for the next 4 years in terms of job growth. The recovery is starting to pick up, and whoever wins this election is going to spend the next 4 years doing laps of honour, no matter what their policies are. Then again, if there's one thing we've learned over the last 4 years, it's that rating agencies are just as unreliable as politicians. Yes, this is getting very confusing. So, breaker.
I'm a Republican and a pro-life mother and a rape survivor. In the hospital, I was offered emergency contraception. Because of my personal beliefs, I declined. Here's what else I believe. No woman should be denied that choice. What Todd Akin said is offensive, but what he believes is worse. He would criminalize emergency contraception.
We have Republicans trying to redefine rape.
Trying to force women to undergo invasive ultrasounds.
If you think that this election won't affect you and your life, think again.
Vote.
Vote. Vote for Barack Obama.
You know, those ads saying Mitt Romney would ban all abortions and contraception seemed a bit extreme. So I looked into it. Turns out Romney doesn't oppose contraception at all. In fact, he thinks abortion should be an option in cases of rape, incest, or to save a mother's life.
Seen this from Mitt Romney? Then take a look at this.
If Roe v. Wade was overturned, Congress passed a federal ban on all abortions and it came to your desk, would you sign it? Yes or no?
Let me say it. I'd be delighted to sign that bill.
Banning all abortions?
I'd be delighted to sign that bill.
Trying to mislead us? That's wrong. But ban all abortions? Only if you vote for him.
This election cycle has already seen literally billions of dollars spent on campaign advertising like that, and the vast majority of it has been decidedly negative in tone. Like that. Yes. But negative ads, while often highly effective, can also at times backfire, and they can turn voters off altogether, although, to be fair, that's sometimes the point as well. Darryl West is an expert on political advertising. He's author of the book Air Wars and head of governance studies at the Brookings Institution in Washington. So tell us just how sophisticated and targeted are election ads getting now?
We've seen a real change in advertising this year in the targeting efforts on the part of the candidates. Candidates can really target with a great deal of precision. They can monitor the sites that people go online and then target ads based on the likelihood of that person being of interest to the campaign. So the ability to target has gone up. It used to be almost all the ad dollars went for television. This year, about 10% of the ad budget is going to digital advertising, and we expect in years to come that percentage is going to rise.
So the ads are targeted, but how effective are they? Do we know?
The nice thing about online advertising is you can get very detailed metrics on what works and what doesn't work. You can monitor how many people click on the ad. You can look at the number of people who share it with their friends. We can monitor those who like particular ads. So one of the things Obama has done is to use what's called A/B testing. He'll put two different versions of the same ad online and then monitor the metrics to see which works. And then he will take that field-tested ad and put it into his television broadcast ad buys.
As recently as 1988, one ad, the Willie Horton ad used against Mike Dukakis, had it seems a major impact on the outcome of that election. Can one ad these days cut through and really define a candidate, or are there just so many of them now that people get kind of overwhelmed?
There isn't any one single ad that has had a amazing impact on this election, but Obama has been very effective at using ads in June and July to frame the early impressions of Mitt Romney. He went after Romney on the issue of fairness, his background at Bain Capital, not being willing to release very many years of his tax returns, and those ads kind of created this image of Romney as a vulture capitalist who didn't care about the middle class and whose policies would only benefit rich people. So the cumulative impact of that series of ads has been devastating for Mitt Romney.
If it is that Barack Obama wins in November, do you think, in retrospect, it's going to be seen that Romney made a big mistake in not answering a lot of the negative ads that were brought out quite early against him in the middle of the year?
If Obama wins, the story of this election is going to be the early advertising in June and July. First impressions matter a lot, and the fact that Obama was able to go hard against Romney during those summer months, and Romney was pretty slow to respond. I mean, he really frittered away a large part of the summer, and so that helped Obama gain an advantage. He went into the conventions and then has come out of that time with not a big lead, but a lead of 3 to 4 percentage points in most of the major national surveys.
Still, heading into the final weeks of the campaign, Mitt Romney has a big money advantage, 2, maybe 3 times if you count the money coming in from the super PACs and so on. Given that he's going to spend a lot of that on advertising, is that likely to have a major impact? Could that change the trajectory of this race significantly?
Romney is counting on a late surge to push him over the top. He's looked at past presidential races, and when a challenger is running against an incumbent, it's almost impossible to develop a lead early in the campaign, but sometimes in that last 1 to 2 weeks, the challenger is able to make a late surge and pull off a victory. Romney will have some ad expenditure advantages going into the closing weeks because Obama really front-loaded more of his advertising expenditures. Romney has saved more of his ad budget for the end, and so he's gambling that that late surge will be enough to put him over the top.
The perception is that most of the ads being seen these days are negative ads, saying how bad the other guy is rather than how great our guy is. Is that in fact what's happening, or are these just the ones that get noticed?
It has been the most negative campaign in recent decades. I've been tracking presidential elections over 3 to 4 decades now, and in the general election period, more than 70% of the TV ads have been negative. This is true both for Obama as well as Romney. So, you know, the vast bulk of all the ads that voters have seen have been negative in tone.
What about the effects longer term of the negative tone of this campaign, given that a lot of Americans are now going to think whoever wins isn't a great guy? Does that have implications for governing into the future as well?
Whoever wins is going to face a major challenge because half of the electorate is going to hate them and think that their vision is wrong for the country. It's going to be hard to pull the country together at the very time when we confront massive fiscal challenges and we need bipartisanship to really address those issues.
Does advertising have a role there in forwarding the agenda of the next president or a returned President Obama?
The ads mattered in the sense that they have played to the voter base for each of the candidates, so they've accentuated the polarization that we've seen, and that is going to make it more difficult for whoever wins to forge alliances, to engage in bipartisan legislation, and to try and negotiate some of the policy differences between the two parties.
Darrell West, thanks for joining us.
Thank you.
And joining us at the roundish table this week, Dr. Ryan Messmore, former research fellow with the Heritage Foundation in Washington, D.C. and the new president of Campion College in Sydney. He's giving a speech to the Centre for Independent Studies this Tuesday about religion and freedom. You can go along if you like, but for now, Dr. Messmore, welcome to Planet America.
Thank you. It's wonderful to be here.
Can we talk a little bit about the issue of religion? We've addressed Mitt Romney's Mormon faith in an electoral sense. Is it going to cost him votes? Right now, he's in front. The polls say in 3 weeks from now, it'll be President-elect Mitt Romney. What are the implications of that?
Yeah, I'm actually surprised in the level of attention that was paid to his Mormon faith 4 years ago when he was running for president compared to this time. You don't hear a lot, or you don't hear as much of that this campaign as you did 4 years ago. I think a lot of people are focusing in America on the economy and on other issues that they feel are are really coming to the brink that it's going to make a huge impact for the future of America, and decisions that the next president makes about debt, entitlement spending, taxes, that sort of thing. And so people are more willing to focus now on those sorts of issues, and they haven't really made as much about his faith as an issue.
Is that just because the economy is lousy, or to an extent is that partly Barack Obama? He broke the mold, and now suddenly a whole bunch of people can be president, conceivably.
Right. And you see a lot of new situations in America right now concerning religion. This is the first time that the Republican ticket doesn't have a Protestant on it. The Supreme Court has 6 Catholics, no Protestants. We may very well have a Mormon in the White House. So a lot of interesting dynamics are happening right now, which is fascinating to kind of watch and see how it's all going to play out.
One area where religion has definitely played a role this year has been in the contraception debate, where Obama has been, at least earlier this year, he seemed to be pitching really hard on the contraception issue, trying to pitch it to women vote. A whole bunch of polls came out suggesting that it was working. And he just kind of stopped talking about it, and now he's not doing so well against women, amongst women. What do you think's happening there?
Yeah, that's a fascinating issue. It's one that, as you know, it was brought up early in the year, probably in February, is when the HHS mandate, the Health and Human Services mandate, was finally issued, which caused the controversy. And it's very hard to sustain that sort of momentum and focus on an issue like that. But surprisingly, there are a lot of churches, particularly the Catholic Church in America, that have been able to sustain that sort of opposition to this mandate. And I think they may be winning the public conversation about that, casting it as a religious liberty issue.
So do you think maybe, even though the mainstream media isn't so much talking about it, it's something that's being talked about in Sundays at church? And,
That's right.
and it's like a grassroots kind of thing that might be starting to
That's right. Yeah, Americans are hearing about that in church. They're hearing about it in local newspapers, in bulletins published by religious organizations. There has been a steady drumbeat in the United States on this issue, and it has been actually very surprising to see that sustained.
Earlier we saw clips from this year's Al Smith dinner in New York City, where both Governor Romney and President Obama are there in white tie and tails, making jokes about the campaign and where they're up to. Al Smith, an interesting character, 1928 Democrat nominee, significant because he was the first Catholic nominated for president. Took another 32 years for a Catholic to get elected president. Now we've got 2 Catholics as the vice presidential nominees.
That's right.
The Catholic Church now, where is it up to politically and in US society? Is this a sign of its influence and power?
The Catholic Church has been very influential in communicating to people in the pew some of the threats, some of the implications that are at stake in this election, particularly around the mandate we were talking about. But the Catholic Church is hard to pin down in terms of being solely in the pocket of one party or another. There, on some conservative issues, the Catholic Church is very strong. On other issues, immigration, death penalty, other issues like that, it has taken an independent stand.
What did you make of the way the 2 VPs in their debate last week, they were both asked about the contraception issue and how their faith plays into that, and the way they dealt with that question in slightly different ways? A lot was made of it in the media.
Right. It was troublesome to me, with an interest in this mandate and the debate around it, to hear Vice President Biden make kind of the bold claim that under this mandate, no church, no hospital would be forced to pay for contraception or be a vehicle for getting contraception. That is not true. That was an inaccuracy on his part. And
deliberate, or just Joe being Joe?
Well, I think he probably was meaning, to give him the benefit of the doubt, that religious groups that don't want to cover abortion-inducing drugs or what have you in their health insurance plans could drop coverage altogether. What he didn't mention is that if you do that under Obamacare, you get slapped with a very heavy fine. Some universities and organizations will pay up to $1 million a month if they choose to drop their coverage. So it's that's one of the tricky things about this mandate. There's just no way out of it. You either violate your conscience or the teachings of your church, or you get slapped with a heavy penalty. There's no way to kind of get out of that mess.
Why is it, do you think, that, as you say, that the Catholic Church is not wholly partisan? They're big on poverty issues, for instance, which is a left-wing cause generally in the cliche. Why is it that religious people in America seem to get more concerned about the contraception type issues than they do about the poverty type issues, which they also believe in? Like, you never see people rallying and having huge grassroots campaign for poverty in the same way that you do about abortion and contraception.
Yeah, well, in America, you have a very robust set of civil society institutions. Actually, conservative studies show that those who are religious and political conservatives in the states actually give more to people in need in terms of time, money, blood, volunteering, that sort of thing, than their counterparts on the left. But they do that through private institutions. They do that through churches and charities and faith-based ministries. And so a lot of those issues, if people feel strongly about them, they exercise them through non-governmental mechanisms. But when you have a mandate like the HHS mandate coming through government, they stand up and oppose that. And thus it gets kind of the headlines of the church battling a public policy.
Final quick question, whether you think that because values voters haven't had the same influence in the Republican primaries and now it seems in the general election as well, is that just because of the state of the economy, or have we seen an evolution in America's history where suddenly religion just isn't that important in politics?
That's an interesting question to see how that plays out in the future. I think we're at a moment right now where I think a lot of Americans are waking up to the serious financial crisis at stake. With our credit rating system being downgraded, people losing their jobs. I think that is the central focus right now. It'll be interesting to see if it is in the future.
It will. Ryan Masswell, many thanks indeed for joining us at the Roundish Table.
Thank you for having me.
Thanks.
And that's all the time we have for Planet America for this week. Next week, a wrap of the third and final presidential debate. Evan Bayh, former Democratic Senator, will join us to have a look at that. We'll also have a chat to one of the leading lights of the Tea Party movement.
Yeah, but this is a news show, kind of, and so it's decreed that we must have some Gangnam-style content synthesised in town. Thankfully, there are about 6 trillion Obama Gangnam-style parodies on YouTube, so we leave you with some random guy doing this. Feels so good. Bye-bye.